Hi, I'm Addison Berry.
I'm Angie Byron.
And I'm Jeff Robbins, and welcome to the next video in the Lullabot Learning Series. This video is called Site Building with Drupal, and we talk about building websites with Drupal. We're going to build this website over the course of this video and show you how to install Drupal, show you how to find and download the modules that you'll need in order to build this type of website. We're going to show you how to download and install themes as well. We're also going to create a couple of different content types. If we go into create content here, you can see we're going to create several different content types, show about listing pages in Drupal, like this news page here that lists all the different news or press releases we have on here as well. We create this gallery of private content that's only being shown to some of the users on the site. We're also going to talk about creating blocks and how blocks work and creating custom blocks and block permissions, as well as a lot of Drupal concepts like taxonomy, and we have a WYSIWYG editor, a what you see is what you get editor, enabled for our content. We'll also show you the final preparations that you'll need before launch, such as setting up cron and getting your search index working, and how to upgrade your site when future updates come out.
So to start things off, we need to get our Drupal site installed. So we're going to walk through the steps on installation. So to start things off, we need to actually get a copy of Drupal, and you can find that on drupal.org, which is the main website. And when you come to the website, you'll see right on the home page on the right hand side here, there's this download block, and it has the latest version of Drupal available. The download link is right here. You can also see that there's a download tab, which you can also get to the download area. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the latest version that we're using here. And it's giving me an announcement that just talks about what is in the newest versions for both 6 and 5. We're going to be using Drupal 6. So I will click the download link, and I'm going to go ahead and just save this to my local machine. And then once I have that down, what I need to do is it comes down in what's called a tar.gz, or a tarball. And what I need to do is uncompress that. That's a compressed file, and what I need to do is uncompress it so that I can get all of the files all in their nice directory structure just the way that I need them. So let me go look at my directory structure. So I downloaded it to my desktop, so I just need to open this file up, and now I get a new directory which still has the version on it. So now this is on my local machine, and I have a copy of the Drupal files. But what I need to do now is actually put them on the server where I'm going to be hosting the site. And to do that, I'll be using an FTP client. So I'm already logged in with my FTP client, and over here in my desktop, this is the folder that I just got when I uncompressed my file, when I download. And so these are all of my Drupal files right here. And over in this window, I've got my public HTML directory, and that's where my website's actually going to live. So all I need to do is copy all of my files, all of my Drupal files, from my local machine over to my server. One really important thing that I want to point out before I actually do this is there's one particular file in your Drupal folder which begins with a dot. It's called .htaccess, and it's really important you make sure that this file gets transferred. There are some operating systems or some clients, FTP clients and such, that don't see files that begin with a dot. They are hidden files on a lot of file systems. And so if you miss that, then when you go to build your site and you are trying to do certain things with it, some stuff might not work quite right, and you can spend a lot of time pulling your hair out trying to figure out why, and it's simply because this one file didn't get transferred over. So you just always want to double check and make sure that your .htaccess file is actually on your server. So I'm going to make sure that I include all of this stuff, so I'm going to select all of these files. Oops, darn it. There. And then I'm just going to drag them over to the server. We're going to cut away for a second just to let these upload because it could take a little while. So now all of my files are on my server, and again, I just want to double check on that htaccess file right here. It's on the server, so things are good, but you always just double check it, and then you'll save yourself a lot of hair pulling later on if you do that. Okay, so I have my Drupal files, and they are on my server. The other half of a Drupal site, though, is the database. So I'm going to set up a database real quickly, and then we can actually proceed with installing the site itself. So what we're using here is cPanel is what's set up on our server for our website. And so what I need to do is go into my databases. Now typically in cPanel, and you might have a different setup depending on how you're accessing your databases, but in cPanel they have their own interface for creating databases. So I'm going to create a database here. Oops. So the database is created. I also need to create a user for my database, so I can put in whatever name it is that I want. I'm just going to use the same name for sanity's sake. And I'll just create a random password here. Whatever your secure password creation process is, you should follow that. I'm also, just in case I happen to forget that, I'm going to go ahead and just copy that because we're going to need that later when we begin our installation. And then I'll go ahead and create the user. And the last step I need to do in this setup here is I need to actually add the user to that database so that they're associated, and that this user has all privileges in that database so it can create the tables that I need and do other stuff like that. So these are the only ones I have set up here. So I'll just go ahead and click Add User to Database. And now it's telling me everything's set up. So now I have a database with a username and password that I know. And I have the files on my server. So now I just need to actually go do my installation. So now I just need to go to my site, and we are prompted with the installation screen. First thing you'll notice is it asks whether you want to actually install this in English, and if you don't, you can go and get more information on how to actually go through the installation screens in another language. You don't have to make this choice now if you just want your site to be in another language. This is just if you want the installation screens themselves to be in a different language. So I'm just going to go ahead and install in English. And whoopsies. Okay, so we have gotten an error, and if you read the error, basically it's telling us a few things that we haven't done yet. So the first thing is that we actually need to copy the settings.php file. It doesn't actually have the correct file in place yet in order to actually create the site. So we just need to copy default settings to a plain settings file. But there's also another thing here, which is that we need to change our file permissions so that things are writable by the server. So we need to take care of these two items before we're allowed to proceed. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the settings.php file that I need. So let me go back to my little directory here. So this was my initial download of my Drupal files, which is on my local machine on my desktop here. And so I'm going to go into Sites, Default, and then I have the default settings.php file is the file that I need to copy. So I'll go ahead and copy this file, and what I want to do is duplicate. And now you notice I have default settings.php and then I have a copy. It's really important to not just rename default settings.php by removing the default. We actually want to copy it. So I've created the copy and now I need to rename this file to be just settings.php. So in my directory, again, this is on my local machine, and this is because I'm using FTP, so I need to create this new file and then upload it to my server. If you have direct access on the server, you could just do this on your server. But once I'm done, I should have in my site's default folder, I should have two files now. I should have a default settings.php and a settings.php. So I've created the file, so all I have to do is copy it. You don't have to edit it or do anything. But now what I need to do is FTP that back up to my server so that it's on my server. So let me open up my FTP client again. And so I'm in the sites directory here. This is my default folder. So there's the initial file, and what I need to do is come back over here. Okay, and here's my new settings file that I created, and just drag that over there. Put that up on the server. Alright, so on the server, I have settings.php. That's step one. Step two is Drupal needs to be able to actually write to this file. So if we look over here in this column here for permissions, now it's got the numbers and stuff like that, but this is not fully writable. So what I want to do is, again, I can right-click on this, oops, select it. I can right-click on this and edit my file permissions. Now this is something I can do through this FTP client. Most FTP clients will allow you to do this. If you have access to the server, you can just SSH in and change the permissions that way. Whatever way works for your setup is what you need to do. But you need to make sure that the settings.php file is actually writable on the server. So all of these need to be set to write. Okay, so that's one of the two things that I needed to do. If we look at our list, I also need to, it's telling me something about changing file permissions because the directory sites default files does not exist, and Drupal cannot actually create that file for us. It tried and it simply can't do it. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create that directory for myself anyway. So I'm going to go back to my FTP client. And we want to put the files directory, it's in site's default folder, so I'm in the proper folder here. And so I just need to add a new directory. And so create directory. And again, this is something that my FTP client's allowing me to do. You'll need to do this however your setup lets you. The name of the folder is files. So I create that. And again, the files directory needs to be writable for Drupal. So I need to go in and actually look at my permissions for this. So I'll right click on this and look at permissions. And it doesn't have anything set. So let's set all of these. There we go. So now it's a fully writable directory and Drupal can do what it needs to do so that we can add our files to our site there. Okay, so I've taken care of the two things that were on my error screen. So now that we've checked our error messages and we've addressed them, let's try again and see if Drupal's happy now. Woohoo! Alright, cool. So now we can actually begin the installation process itself. And the first thing that Drupal needs is our database information from that database that we just created a few minutes ago. So I have the my database information. I wrote that down from earlier so that I can just copy and paste that in, make my life a little bit easier. So this is the database name that was generated. Just remember I typed in site building, but cPanel and my host did their own magic to it to actually create the database and username they wanted. So just make sure you have the right database information from your host, and you can go ahead and put that in. So let me do this. And my username and our lovely secure password, and I have that information. Now there is a a collapsed field set underneath here for advanced options, which I don't need to fill out for this, but I'll just show you real quickly in case you do need it. By default, it's assuming that the database host is on localhost. There are web hosts out there that actually have a different database host name, and so you would need to enter that information in here. Also, if you happen to have a different database port, which is relatively rare, or if you wanted to do table prefixing where you only have one database available to you, but you want to have multiple applications running, then you need to actually prefix your different applications table names. And so you could type whatever you wanted in here, like Drupal underscore or my site underscore or whatever. I don't need to use any of these options, but I just wanted to point out that they are down here. So if you need to do a little extra database information that you've gotten from your host, that's where that would go. So I've got my information in, so let's go ahead and click this. And we see we're getting an installation. And voila. So it's again giving me a message, and it's telling me that Drupal has made the changes that it needs. And so remember, we made everything really wide open on the settings.php file. I made it completely writable. Now that everything's been done, we don't want it to stay writable. We don't want anybody to be able to come to the server and change the information there. It'd be bad. So what we want to do now is lock down the permissions on that again, exactly the same way that I just did when I opened them up. So I'm going to go back to the FTP client, change my permissions, and then we'll come back to continuing on with our installation here. So here's my settings file. That's what it's talking about. Right now it has fully writable permissions, and what I need to do is right click, file permissions, and I just want to make this not writable anymore. So I'm the owner, so I can keep it writable for me, but I don't want anybody else to be able to write to it, so we'll just leave it at that, and that's done. Okay. So we'll go ahead and just reload this page and make sure that actually took. Yay! Okay, so now I'm getting the green message, which is saying everything looks good. So now we just need to continue configuring our site. First thing is site information. You'll notice the site name is automatically filled in for us, and it's just taking the site name from the URL. So, if it's example.com or, mysite.com, it's just going to put that in there. You don't have to leave that in there. And we're actually going to go ahead and just change this to our site name. Site email address. So this is sort of like an administrative email. So like when your Drupal site sends an email out for any reason, the from address would be this email address. So you probably don't want to necessarily put your personal address in there, something like that. A generic site maintainers or administrator kind of address would be best for that. Go ahead and create the administrator account. So I'll just use the very clever name of admin. It automatically fills in our email address that we used above. I'm going to leave that just like it is. And I'm going to go ahead and put in a password. Now you notice that Drupal's trying to help me out here. So I've put in a weak password, and it's telling me that the password strength is low. It wants me to put some more stuff in there to strengthen my password. It's also checking if the passwords actually match, and they do. So I have matching passwords, but they're low security. And it gives me a little hint here about what I could do to make things a little bit better. So I'll go ahead and just add a few more characters in here and see if it likes that better. So I've gotten it up to medium. It's still not high. But also now my passwords don't match. So let me try that again. So they're matching, and it's medium strength. So I'll go ahead and just move on. I'm happy with my password there. The last section on our configuration screen here is it's setting the default time zone. It's automatically trying to guess where I am, which it has done so accurately. It may or may not guess correctly. You also might be building a site in your time zone, but you're actually building the site for someone who lives in another time zone, and so that they want the default time zone for their site to be something different. So you can adjust that here if you need to, but by default, it's typically set to wherever you're located. And you can also adjust these settings afterwards. So after you've done the installation, if you need to change the default time zone for the entire site, you can go back and change that later. The next thing on here are our clean URLs. So by default, if you look in the URL, you'll notice things like, you know, question marks and equal signs and things like that. In your Drupal site, that's the default way that a URL is going to sort of look like. When you enable clean URLs, you remove that, and all you have are the words and the slashes in the URL. So it makes things a little prettier, it makes it easier for people to remember what the exact URL for something is. And it's generally a good idea. Most sites today use that, and it's considered a best practice. Now, what Drupal's done here in this installation process is it's actually run a little check against our server to see if our server is set up correctly to use clean URLs, and ours is. So we have the green message here telling us that it's been tested and it supports it. That's great. We have the option to disable it if we want to, but honestly I can't think of a reason why you'd want to do that. One important thing to note here, if you remember when we were copying the files and I pointed out that .htaccess file is really important and you need to make sure it's there, this is why. If you come to your installation screen and this is not enabled, you know, and you don't have successful test here and it's grayed out, chances are it's because you forgot to move that htaccess file. So if you see that, go back, check, make sure the htaccess file is actually on your server, and if not, copy it over there, and then this should come back to you. So that is sort of the importance of that file, amongst others. So clean URLs, I'm going to leave those enabled because I like those. And then the last thing we have here is update notifications. And this is basically a very simple mechanism so that Drupal can check to make sure that the files you have on your server are up to date. Is Drupal core itself up to date? And it will also check your contributed modules and themes. And so if a new release comes out, there's a screen, which we'll be covering later, that just actually shows you, oh, this is out to date, has a security update, or this is just a new release with new features, so that you can sort of keep up on your site. Really, really, really important for security. If you start running unsecure code and let everything get out of date, then you're opening your site up to vulnerabilities. So we're just going to leave this checked. I don't want to, I want to keep up to date on my site, so we'll leave that. Now I have everything configured for the basic configuration, so I'll save that. Installation's complete. So we've gone through, we've done the database, we have the site set up, and now I have a link to actually go see my new site. And voila! Welcome to my new Drupal website. So we've just walked through a typical Drupal installation using one particular tool set. There are other ways that we could have approached this. I just put everything up directly onto the server where the site's going to live, and I'm going to be building it out there. Alternatively, you could also use something like MAMP or WAMP or XAMPP, which is a local web server that you can set up on your own machine at home. You can build the site there, and then you can move it up to the live site when you're ready to actually go. There are also a wide variety of tools that you could use for this. Again, I used FTP, but if you have shell access, you can SSH. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But just realize there are different tool sets. So I followed a particular path here in terms of my tools, but that's not the important point. The important part here is the actual steps we had to walk through of making sure we had the files, making sure we had htaccess, setting up our database, and then walking through the configuration steps. And that's how we got ourselves started.
So now that we've got Drupal installed, let's take a look at what we've got. On the home page, Drupal gives us some instructions. It says, welcome to your new Drupal website. And there are these steps, basically, for how to get started. It says we should go to the administration section and customize and configure the site, and we can enable more modules and that kind of thing. I'm just going to sort of click around and show you some stuff. The first thing that you might notice is this My Account link on the left-hand side. Since we've just created our website, we're automatically logged in as user 1. You can see that up in the URL here, user 1. User 1 has all permissions to do everything on the website. User 1 is always the super administrator. And so you don't want to lose the password for user 1 because it's if anything ever goes wrong, you can always log in as user 1 and get access to the administration section and fix things. The next link here is create content. I'm going to skip that one for a moment and go to administer. This is the administration section for Drupal. We're getting a little warning right now that cron has not run. We'll talk a little bit about cron later and exactly what that is and how it works. And you can see that this section is organized into these groups of links. Content management, site building, user management, site configuration, and reports. This section, this administration section, is not available to all users on the website. It's only available to users with the correct permissions. We'll talk about roles and permissions later in this video. If I log out, I won't be able to see this anymore. But let's create a little bit of content so we can get this welcome to your new Drupal website stuff off of the home page. The default option for Drupal on the home page is what's called a river of news. I'm going to create a couple of stories so you can see what happens on the home page. Actually, let me explain. When we go to create content, we have two different types of content that's here, page and story. In Drupal core, these are very similar kinds of content. They both have a title field and a body field. If you click on page, you'll see the title field and the body field. And story looks very much the same. What's slightly different about these two different pieces of content is how they're presented. By default, story content gets what Drupal calls promoted to the front page, and it will show up in that river of news on the front page. Pages, however, do not. The other difference is that stories show the submitted by line, so it'll say submitted by, I'm logged in as admin now, so it would say submitted by admin and the date that it was submitted, very much like a blog post. Pages will not. So pages are good for like static pages on your site, things that aren't going to change, the About Us page, the welcome page for our site, whereas stories are better for topical information that you might think of as blog post kinds of things, news, topical stuff that you want to have a byline on, which you want to have you know, the author and the date posted. So let me create a couple of stories just to show you how Drupal's default stuff works. I'm going to create a quick lorem ipsum post here and paste in some lorem ipsum. Save this. Let me create one more. Go to create content, story, create another one called ipsum lorem. Paste in the content here. Hit save this. And now when we go to the home page, you can see that the two stories that I've created are here promoted on the home page. They both have the date information for when they were created and a link to my user page. What we're seeing here is what's called the teaser view in Drupal. When you click on the title, you get to the full body view. By default, the teaser in Drupal is just sort of the first paragraph, but there are ways to change that. We get a lot more into that in our administering Drupal video. Let's change this though, because I don't want to actually have this river of news style listing on the homepage. I want the homepage to be our welcome page. So I'm going to go into create content and create a page called welcome. Put some lorem ipsum text in here. We can have our site editor come in later and put in proper copy, but for now we'll just fill it out with some text here. Now, I actually want this homepage to show up as a link in our primary navigation. I have menu settings here, and I could type in the word home here, and it would show up here. However, I'm going to do this slightly differently, and I'll try and explain why in just a moment. if I hit save here, I now have a welcome page. And now if we notice here, it's at node/4. And I want this to be the home page of our site. One of the problems with page content not being promoted to the home page, not showing up in that river of news, is that now that welcome page is kind of gone. It's not showing up on the home page, and I don't know where it is. So for page type content, you'll usually want to put it in the menu navigation or link to it somewhere. Be sure that that it doesn't kind of get lost like that, unless you want it to. It still exists there. What I now want to do is I want to make that that welcome page be our home page. If I go under Site Information here, this is one of those pages that you kind of set it up and then you forget about it, and it's always I find myself oftentimes if I want to change the front page, I can never quite remember where it's done. But this is where it's done. Admin, Settings, Site Information, and we just type in the URL to the page that we would like to become the home page. And we found that it was node 4, so node/4 here. Click Save Configuration. And now when we go back to the home page, we've got the welcome page there. However, we still don't have a primary navigation. It doesn't really matter so much right now because we don't have anything else in the primary navigation, so this is kind of the only place to go. But let's add a link to the front page in the primary navigation. Now, I could have entered it onto the onto that welcome page itself. If I go in here and say I wanted to add it here, I'll just show you actually what it would do here. If I say home here and add it to primary links and click save, go back to the home page, and the link that we get actually goes, if you can see in the status bar down here, it actually links us to node/4. So if I click it, I'm really no longer linking to the home page. I'm linking to the sort of alias of this page elsewhere. This is the internal URL that Drupal's thinking of for this page. So if I go into this, I want to delete this menu item because I need to add it a different way. And now I no longer have the primary navigation here. If I go under Administer Menus, I can go to the primary links, and there's no menu items yet. There's a tab here to add an item, and I want to add something, and you can see if you read this small text here, I can enter this variable front to link to the front page of the site. If I say front here and create a menu item for home, this is a link that will always link to the front page of the site. Whatever set up as the front page of the site, it will link to /. And if it's automatically in primary links here, and I click save, and now I've got a link that if you look in the status bar down here, just links to the top level URL for this website. And here we go. We've now got a welcome page as the home page of our site. Let me log out and just show you what things look like for logged out users. Users who do not have the permission to edit content on your site or visit the administration section. These users do not see the View tab or the Edit tab, and they can't go to the administration. So if I were to go here, there's no link to it, but if I were to just type in /admin here in the URL, I get an access denied message. So just to realize that Drupal has a very robust and complex user permission system. Obviously, there's a major difference between non-logged in users and the site administrator, but there are all sorts of shades of gray, different roles for users in between. So you can have logged in users on the site who don't have permission to do much. So there you go. Now we've got the welcome page for the site, and we've got a link in the primary navigation to the home page.
This section of the video will talk all about modules. Modules in Drupal are the way that you change the way that Drupal works. So for example, adding new features or changing behaviors in Drupal, those are all done through little add-on pieces of code called modules. This chapter will talk about how to install and configure modules and how modules basically work in the larger Drupal site building process. I'll begin by logging in as the administrative user. And I'll go into the administration section. And then under site building, I'll click on modules. This page is sort of the central configuration panel that you have for all of the features on your site. You can see that these are some optional modules that we have enabled to add additional functionality to Drupal. And then there's also the required section, which is some of the things that we've talked about already: Node, dealing with any content in the system, users, which manages the login system. And these are here no matter what Drupal site that you are on. Everything else is in one of these other field sets called a package. And then that is how you add additional functionality to Drupal. You can see that the modules in this list are listed under the core optional package. And what that means is that, not every site will have these features on them. But what you can do is if you need a particular piece of functionality, for example, a forum, you can check this box and just turn it right on. Other information that you can find on here are dependencies. For example, in order to enable the forum module, I need also the taxonomy and comment modules, which it indicates here are already enabled. Extra modules that you download from Drupal.org, which we'll get into shortly here, those all often need additional dependencies, and we'll get into what some of that stuff is later. The main thing with Drupal is that the modules tend to just do one thing and do it well. So a lot of times you'll find that there is no one module that gives you the feature that you're looking for on your site. It's a combination of several modules. They're all kept modular so that you can mix and match them and tailor the behavior to the specific functionality you want on your site. Another element to discuss here is the module uninstallation tab. If you've played with a module and you decide you don't want it anymore, you can uninstall it here. Note that it needs to be disabled before you can actually uninstall it. Also in the administration section, something that's useful is, in addition to by tasks, so things like content management and site building, there's also the by module tab, which will actually put the configuration screens per module. You can see that each module that's enabled often offers some permissions that can be configured, offers additional administration screens, and also allows you to get help from the help section. So let's explore an opportunity for using a module to achieve something we want. If I click on the home page and you see how there's this view button here, this is giving me a URL for this page of node/4. This is how Drupal internally refers to a piece of content, but that's not very user-friendly or particularly search engine friendly either. It'd be really nice if we could actually enter in this path ourselves and make it something that makes a little bit more sense, such as welcome. So we'll go into Administer, Site Building, Modules, and we'll go ahead and enable the Path module. The Path module allows users to rename URLs. When I save this here, I'll notice I get a notification that I need to check for currently installed modules. We'll get into this a little bit later in the video, but essentially what this is a system in Drupal called Update Status that checks through all of the modules you have enabled on your site and checks against the mother site at Drupal.org to see if you need anything updated. So you'll get this notification whenever you enable or disable new modules. If I go under Administer by Module, I'll see that Path module has created a new entry here. And I can see that if I click Configure Permissions, it's defined a few permissions for me to assign to my users. And if I click on URL aliases, this gives me to an administration page where I can sort of manage things. Let's go ahead and edit the piece of content, though. Another thing that modules can do is they can often just add additional settings to other settings forms. So for example, this is the content creation and editing form. And I'll see that after enabling the path module, I now get this new URL path settings box. And I can type in welcome here and save. And now, instead of getting that ugly node/4, I get a nice /welcome, which is a lot easier and nicer to show to my users. Another thing that's kind of important to note is that modules will stick their settings in a bunch of different places. Usually anything under site building is something you'll go back to time and time again. For example, blocks, which are these little sidebar things, you'll often go back through the process of building your site to change how those things work. And modules is under this section as well for the same reason. However, anything under site configuration is generally something that you do once, and then once it's done, you sort of leave it alone. For example, in the previous section, we changed the site's default front page. Once we figure out that we want the front page to be the welcome page, that's generally the last time we're going to monkey around in there, so that should be fine. Oftentimes, the modules that come with Drupal core are not as extensive as what you'd like. There are some neat features here, however, like you can check a box to turn on a forum, check a box to turn on a basic blog, but a lot of times your specific site's needs go way beyond what Drupal core offers out of the box. So what you need to do in that case is go and download what we call contributed modules, and these are modules that don't come with Drupal itself but are contributed by the Drupal community. To do that, we'll go to the Drupal.org website, the same place where we downloaded Drupal itself. If I click download, I'm given a variety of different project types to download, such as the Drupal project itself, or modules, or themes, or translations are generally the most common. If I click on modules, I'll be given a gigantic list of all of the possible modules that Drupal can have installed for it. These are in an alphabetical list by default. Over on the side here, you can also change the way they're sorted and also filter by compatibility. This is particularly important because if you have Drupal 6 installed, but you try and install a Drupal 5 module, it won't work and it won't function. So it's always good to make sure that the version of the module that you're using is the same one that Drupal uses itself. If we click on a particular module here, you'll be taken to what's called a project page for the module. And all modules and themes and Drupal itself all have one of these pages. The pertinent thing to look at is this release table down here. Anything that's in red here is called a development snapshot, and generally you don't use those unless you are a developer and you want to try and help the maintainer out by finding bugs. Although sometimes that will have newer bugs fixed and features that the last official release doesn't have. In general, you'll deal with the official releases. These generally come out as 1.1, 1.2, and over time you can update them and get new bug fixes and new features. It can be a bit frustrating trying to find the module that you're looking for in this gigantic list, even with, limiting it down by, say, developer modules or administration modules, and limiting it by the version of Drupal you're looking for. A really neat trick is to go to the download and Drupal project page, and take a look at this link at the bottom here called View Usage Statistics. Every project has one of these. This will show you the general usage in the community as well as the trends over time. A really handy link that you can get to from any project page, project usage page, is the usage statistics for all projects. This page shows a gigantic list of all of the projects on the entire site, starting with Drupal, which of course is going to have the most, all the way down to modules and projects that aren't used at all. In general, anything that's in this sort of top 20-ish list here is a good bet, because that means that there's lots of other people using it on their websites, and generally that's a good thing to have going for you as well. A few of these Drupal views, content construction kit, token, path auto, administration menu. Generally, these are used on pretty much every single Drupal site that you build. After that, it starts to get a little bit more usage specific. You won't really have CAPTCHA module on if your site doesn't allow user-generated content. Some of the image handling modules are sort of more general case. It depends on how you're uploading images, depending on which ones that you'll use. And we'll be getting into that a little bit later as well. For now, I wanted to just install kind of a simple module, which is called Administration Menu. On this page, I can see that it's used by quite a lot of people. If I click on the Administration Menu project page link, I'm taken to the actual project page, which looks a lot like the one we were looking at before. On this case, they have several other ones that are, for example, the 3.0 version is supported for Drupal 6, which means it's currently in development. They're asking for beta testers. We're not looking for anything too exciting, so we'll just go ahead and go with the version for 6.x that's recommended for this release. So if you click the download link and click Save, I'll just go ahead and save that to my desktop here. So now that we've got the file downloaded, let's go ahead and pop it open and see what type of things are in there. If I open this up, what I see here is a bunch of different files actually, but the main ones that are important are the .module file, that's kind of the central place where the code lives, and the .info file, which if you open it, will what you'll see is a variety of just sort of metadata about the module. So you'll get its name and description, what package it's in, what version of core it's compatible with, as well as some version information that's added by Drupal.org. And that version information comes in really handy for later when we're talking about updating your modules over time. The next logical thing to ask would be, what do I do with this module now that I've downloaded and extracted it? I'm just going to take a look through the Drupal files that we downloaded before, just so we can kind of see how it looks. In the files, you might notice a modules folder and might think, well, that sounds like the perfect place to add my module. However, modules as well as themes, these are for core itself. So generally you don't want to actually alter anything in the modules directory and the themes directory. Leave those alone because that way you know what code is yours and what code came with the Drupal you downloaded. Where you want to go instead is the sites folder, which we went into before in order to add the settings.php file and the files directory. There's two sites under here. There's default and there's all. Let's take a moment to talk about the Drupal multi-site feature. The multi-site feature of Drupal allows you to run multiple domains such as example.com and banana.com off of the same Drupal installation, which is really nice for maintenance. So what this structure is essentially saying is if it can't find something more specific, such as a folder specifically named example.com, it'll just use whatever's in here. And the all folder is for every site that you ever install. So generally the best practice is to put the modules that you're going to use most commonly on every site into the all directory. And then if you ever have sort of a one-off module that only makes sense on one particular site, you'd add it to, say, the default folder. But in the vast majority of cases, what you'll actually do here is put everything under sites all. So I'll begin by creating a new folder called modules. Drag that up into here. And while I'm at it, I might as well make a new folder called themes. And drag that up into there as well. And then I'll move the admin menu folder into sites all modules. So this is the best practice on where to locate your modules. Always under sites all modules, never under the root modules directory. So we'll just pop open our FTP client here and go ahead and upload those things where we need them. So I'll go to sites, all, to the all directory, and move over the modules and themes folder from my local host up to the live server. Now, back in Drupal, if I reload the modules page, what I'll see is a new entry was added here, call it administration menu, and that was added by the module that I just uploaded to the sites all modules directory. I can go ahead and click enable, just as I did with path module, to turn that on. And now I'll notice I got this nice looking and very helpful administration bar along the top. So instead of having tediously click administer site building modules, I can just go directly there from this little menu. So what we've just shown you is the general process that works for any contributed module to download and install and enable it on your Drupal site. And this is important because on any typical site that you build with Drupal, you're not talking about just using what comes with Drupal. You're talking about using a wide range of all types of contributed modules. Oftentimes you have more than a dozen or 24 modules on your site to really build out the functionality that your clients need. So in this next section, what we'll be talking about is we'll show you sort of a baked cake version of the site with all the modules that we use on 80% of the sites that we build that can hopefully be helpful for you for any sites that you tend to build. And we'll walk through what each one of these does and the general use cases that they can be used for. So we'll take a look at our modules page, which has grown considerably in length since the last time we looked at it. We'll start in the administration section. Here's the administration menu module which we just uploaded in the previous segment. And we've also got one called admin role, which we'll be looking at when we start dealing with users and permissions. CCK is a module that you might hear of very often in the Drupal community. What this essentially allows you to do is add additional fields other than just title and body to pieces of content. So we have not only the core content module enabled here, but we also have image field to add images, number, option widgets and text, and just some general modules that we enable anytime we enable CCK. You can see that these modules have dependencies. All of these modules are dependent on content, and some of them, like image field, for example, has additional dependencies on say, the file field module. In the core section, what we've done is enable a couple of the optional modules. We've enabled aggregator. This will allow us to do kind of a neat little who's talking about Lullabot section of the site. We've also got the profile module, which will talk about adding user information to the profile section of the website. So if you wanted to add like a full name field instead of just a username and email. We have the site search. It's always nice to be able to find your content once you've created it. And other than that, we've kind of left this section for the most part alone. In the development section, we have a couple of modules enabled here. One is the devel module, which offers just some nice little debugging tools, as well as a couple of really useful blocks to do some common development tasks. There's also the devel generate module, which we use in order to sort of populate the site out with some dummy content, because it can be really hard to tell how a site's going to look until you have a few pieces of content there as an example. We've also enabled a few add-on modules. The flag module, for example, allows you to perform bookmarking on the site, and actually it's a neat little module that lets you kind of do on-off toggles to any piece of content or users or other things. So not only can it be used for bookmarks, but you can also use it, for example, marking a user as obnoxious or saying that you will or will not sign up to an event. Image cache is a neat little suite of modules. This basically allows us to control the sizes of images that are posted to the site so that we can ensure that they're always at a certain thumbnail size or they don't break the layout of the site. Also in the realm of these little add-on modules is a simple news module. What this does, as its name might imply, is it adds a little simple newsletter to your site that users can subscribe to and receive email notifications when new issues are available. Other is kind of the dumping ground. If a module isn't really dependent on something else, it generally just doesn't put it in a package at all, and then all of these get listed here. So in here we have sort of a potpourri, if you will, of all of the sort of add-on modules that don't really fit into any other categories. CVS Deploy is a module that we're using because we're downloading all the Drupal modules from CVS rather than from the website. Sort of an advanced developer tool that's kind of neat to do to speed up deployment. We also have global redirect, and what this does is ensure that in the case where we used before where we changed a path from node/4 to welcome, global redirect will ensure that if someone does end up at node/4 for some reason, they'll always get redirected to one single path. It's good for search engine optimization. The Mollum module we're using as an anti-spam protection. So what Mollum does is it will analyze any comments posted to your site, or potentially content as well. And it will analyze it for any sort of suspicious behavior, either spam or abusive content. And it will sort of ping off the server, and if it thinks that it's encountering someone who is not really a human and is perhaps a spam robot, it'll present them with a CAPTCHA. But the nice thing is it doesn't present everyone with a CAPTCHA, and you can also exempt certain roles from that as well. In our previous example, we used the path module to create a nice welcome path for our home page. That can get a little bit tedious to keep doing over and over and over again. So what the path auto module does is allow us to set up rules to govern all of our URLs in the system so that we never need to manually intervene. It's reliant on the token module, which as you can see is checked automatically by default and can't be unchecked because it's a dependency of a module that's already enabled. And finally, in this section, we have the web form module, which is useful for doing things such as surveys or questionnaires or things like that. Views is another one of those examples of modules that are just critical to building any Drupal site. Views is sort of a sister module to CCK, where CCK lets you create additional fields onto content. Views will let you create listings of content. But it actually goes far beyond that, and it can also provide listings of users or files or anything else in your system. What it essentially is sort of a graphical user interface on top of a query builder. So instead of having to hard code SQL queries and things like that, users can basically click around and create their own listing pages, such as a photo gallery and a grid, or a listing of content sorted by the date it was posted, or lots of different things like that. And finally, we have the voting area, and we've enabled the 5-star module to allow ratings on photos, and it's required on the voting API, which is just sort of a general API module to handle voting in a central place. One last thing to just point out here is a lot of these modules, such as views, for example, are sort of mega modules. When we downloaded admin menu, that was just a single .module file and a single .info file. But oftentimes, modules will sort of compared with a bunch of different modules altogether. So for example, if I open up the views module and CCK is similar, I'll see that not only does this come with a views module, but it also comes with a views UI module. And that separation is kind of nice because once you've gotten your views all set up the way that you want them, you can turn off the views UI module, and that's less code that you're loading on every single page. In this chapter, we talked all about modules, downloading modules, finding modules, and installing modules to extend your Drupal site's functionality. Modules are something that you deal with a lot when building a Drupal site, so it's useful to know where to find them and which ones are the best to use. What we've outlined in this chapter are sort of the top 80% that we use on a lot of different sites. For example, CCK and views are fundamental to building most Drupal sites that you see out there today. So we hope that you can find this information helpful in whatever sites that you want to build.
Drupal is a content management system, and one of the great strengths of Drupal is that it has multiple content types that we can use to help organize and manage our content. So in this chapter, we'll be looking at our content and figuring out what kinds of types we can use and how we want to set them up so that we can build the site that we need. So to start off, let's go look at the existing content types that we already have. So I'm going to go to Administer, and under Content Management, Content Types. Now, we've already looked at page and story earlier, and you'll notice that we have two new content types listed here, and that's from what we did with our modules when we started enabling modules. Some of those modules added some content types for us, namely the newsletter issue and the web form. So we're not going to be working with those right now, but we do need to look at what content we will need for the site and what we have. We've already used page, and we'll probably need to create at least one or two other pages on the site, so that's fine. One of the other requirements that we have is to have a list of news articles. Now, we could use story for that, although the name story doesn't quite match up with what our end users are going to be looking for. So what we can do is we can change story, make a few modifications to it, and sort of turn it into a news article so that when our end users go to create this content, it'll make sense to them and be very obvious to them. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and click Edit for the story content type. So in the top section of this form, you can see we have three fields. We have the name, the type, and the description. And so what I want to do is change this from just being a story, which doesn't have much meaning, and turn it into a news article. So the name is the human readable name. This is what your end users will see when they want to create a piece of content. They'll see this name, and so I'm going to call this news article because that makes a lot more sense to them than story. Now the type is in the database. This is how Drupal actually sort of tracks it, and so this is called a machine readable name. And we could leave this as story, but it's a really good idea to sort of have the type for your content type sort of match up with the name. The type is the kind of is the word that you're going to see in various user interfaces when you're configuring the site. So something like in views when you're creating lists and stuff, and when you're selecting what content type do you want, this is the name that's going to appear there. And so it can get confusing if you have different names. So it's a good idea to have your type be very similar to the actual human readable name. So I'm actually going to change this to article. One really important thing to keep in mind, though, is you really want to do this at the beginning of building your site. You don't want to change the machine name halfway through. It'll monkey all kinds of things up, because once Drupal is expecting that type, that machine readable name, if you change it, then Drupal's not going to know what you're talking about anymore. So since we're just beginning to build the site and sussing out what we're doing, I'm going to change it here. But just keep in mind that once the site's going, you've started creating lots of content and getting things rolling, you really shouldn't be changing this. The last bit here is description. The description also appears on the list on the Create Content page. So it says news article, which is the name, and then it has a short description just to explain to people what it is. We have this long description for what a story content type is in Drupal, and I don't need all that. My users really don't need all that. So I'm just going to put a little note in here that this is just a public news article. So my users will know what that means. So that's my little text changes there. Now let's come down, and we actually have some collapsed field sets. So there are a bunch of defaults in here, and what we want to do is make sure that all of the defaults that are in these collapsed field sets are what we actually want. When you set up a content type, the settings that we put on this page are going to be the defaults for every individual piece of content for this type that we create in the future. So every time someone creates a news article, whatever's in here are going to be their default settings that they have. So let's talk about submission form settings. We have some basic stuff in here. So the first two things we have a title field label and a body field label. When you create a piece of content, like we did with the page content earlier, when we created the welcome page, we had two fields that we could fill out. We had a text field, which was title, and we had a text area, which was called body. Now the labels that were associated with those fields were coming from this. So the title was title, and the body was body. We can change that here, and again, because these are news articles, we can change these to make it a little more in line with what our content type might be expecting. So I'm going to change the title to actually say headline, because it's a news article. And for the body, instead of body, I'm going to say text. So now when someone goes to create this content type, instead of seeing title and body, they're going to be prompted to do a headline and text. The next thing we have here is minimum number of words. I personally don't use this setting very often, but if you want to make sure that you have a minimum length in that text area, this is where you could set that. So there's a drop down with a bunch of pre-selected numbers, and so you could pick, you know, I want a minimum of 1 word. So they can't do it blank. Can't do it blank anyway. But you know, if you wanted something to be more substantive, like you wanted it to be at least 200 words or something like that, you could set that in here. I'm going to leave it blank, so I'm not too worried. Explanation or submission guidelines. This is just simply a little help text box that will appear at the top of the Create Content form. So when someone goes to create that piece of content, you can give them particular directions, like your headline should be in all caps, something rude and obnoxious. But basically, this is just a place for you to give tips to people as they're filling out that form. So I'm not going to worry about anything in there either. So I have those taken care of. And now let's look at comment settings. Oh, lovely, lovely comment settings. So we'll just start with this top list of items. The default comment setting. We have 3 options: disabled, read only, read write. So it's at read write by default. That means basically comments are enabled. When we post this content, people will be able to leave comments on the site if they have permissions to be able to do so. Typically you would toggle either between read write or disabled. You just don't want people to be able to leave comments. Read only is not very often used. It is typically used when people have been leaving comments for a while and you want to stop that, but you don't want to, you know, just blank out all of those comments and have them go away entirely. You want people to be able to continue to read them. You don't want them to be able to add any more. So that's what the read only setting is for. When you click disabled, no comments would show up at all, period, even if they existed already. So our news articles, we want people to talk about them, so we're going to leave comments enabled for that. Now when you have comments enabled, you have a whole bunch of different settings on how you want to have the comments displayed. So this is all about displaying your comments. And these are the defaults we have set. So we have a threaded list. So flat would be all the comments are one right under the other. And when you have a threaded one, when someone replies to this comment, then it would be indented a little bit just to show the relationship, that there's a child-parent relationship between those comments. So then we have default display order. And So we have newest first or oldest first. Newest first meaning the last comment would be at the very top. I actually find that kind of disturbing because I like to read things in chronological order. So we're going to set that to oldest first because I want the oldest comment and the newer ones that come underneath it come later to be underneath. Comments per page. Again, you can set this to anything you like. If you know, you have something that's going to be getting a lot of comments, and the person who's having the site built doesn't want, you know, to cut it off at 50. I want to show all the comments, everybody can read them. You can set that to be longer. Comment controls is a little nutty, but basically what this is this will provide an interface on the comment form or on the content where the comments are listed to let your end user determine how they want to have the comments displayed. Now that sounds good because it sounds flexible and it lets my users, you know, set things up the way they want to see them, but it ends up confusing people more than anything. So I never ever display those, and it's probably a really bad idea, and it's not something that you would commonly see on any website out there because it is generally just more confusing to people than actually helpful. So we're going to leave that alone. Anonymous commenting, we don't have this, we can't even select anything here. If I try to select stuff, you can see it's grayed out. It's not doing anything for me. And that's because we haven't set up permissions to even allow this to happen. So if we let anonymous users comment on the site, then we could determine when they do that, do they have to leave any contact information or not? Can they post completely anonymously, or do they have to give us an email address? But since we don't have that permission set up, we can't even select it anyway. So that's easy. Comment subject field, when you fill out a comment, should there be a subject line, or should you just use the comment? And that's it. So we'll let people put a subject field in there if they want to. Previewing comment is an interesting setting. You can make it optional or required. One of the reasons that people like to set previewing to required, so this is when I go to fill out a comment on a site and I hit submit, instead of actually submitting the comment, what will happen is a preview will come up, and so I have to sort of read my preview, and then I can really submit the comment to the site. So it makes me go through a preview step. One of the reasons that people require this is because if they don't let people edit their comments, they want to give everyone their last shot to actually review it before they submit it to the site. Because if I make a typo and then I submit and it's gone, it's gone. I can't edit it anymore. So by requiring a preview, it sort of prompts people to actually review it and read it and correct any typos if they have it. It can also be really annoying to have to preview every single time you do a comment. So this is one of those things that it's just a site decision that you need to make. And then the location of the comment submission form. Should it be on a separate page, or should it be in line with your comment right underneath, right underneath your content? If you display it on a separate page, there's a link at the bottom of the content that says add a comment or something to that effect. You click the link, that takes you to the form where you fill in the comment. Displaying the post right underneath is really handy because no one has to actually leave the page. They can be on the page, reading the content, and then putting their reply directly underneath, and they don't have to go off to another page. So we'll go ahead and set that one to just post below. Alright, so those are comment settings. There are a lot of them. It's a little overwhelming, but you just sort of work your way through. And again, if you've disabled comments, you don't have to deal with any of that stuff. Now this field set that we have here, this 5-star ratings, I'll open it up, although we're not going to actually enable this. This is not something that is a default core field set that would appear on our content type. This has been added by the 5-star module. So another thing to keep in mind, we're going to set up our content type, and I'm going to set up all of my defaults. But in the future, as I go down the road, if I enable another module that has an impact on content types, it might add additional information to this screen. And so you might need to come back here to do more configuration for new modules as you add them. So just something to keep in the back of your mind in terms of the settings, and you're like, whoa, where did that setting come from? Part of the reason that you're creating these different content types is so I don't want 5-star on this, so I'm not going to enable it. But I might want 5-star ratings for certain other things, other areas of the site. And so by having different content types, I don't have to enable it here, but I could enable it on something else like photos, which we might do later. So that's one of the reasons you can have identical content types, identical settings, except for 1 or 2 settings that make a difference. And again, that helps you keep things organized and sort of slice and dice your content in to a much more fine degree than if everything was all the same and you had to make this decision globally. You can make this per content type and get very, very fine control over your content. Okay, so we're not going to do anything with 5-star. It's news articles. We don't need to rate them. This last field set we have, it's a really important field set. These are the workflow settings. These determine some important basics about our content. So we have, under these default options, we have published. So when we, again, remember these are defaults. I'm in the content type. So this is a default for every news article everyone creates. This is going to be the default setting. So this is saying that when you write a new news article, it's going to be published right away. That's it. Also promoted to front page. We're not really using the promoted to front page feature of Drupal. We talked about a little earlier how there's this sort of front page river of news, which is the default Drupal front page, but we replaced that with our welcome page. So we don't really sort of have that river of news, and we're not really using that in our site. So this isn't an important setting for us on this site, but on another site it might be. If we were creating a blog and we had a bunch of different content types, would we want news articles actually promoted to that front page or not? And that would be the decision you would have to make. And again, here it doesn't actually really matter. I'm going to uncheck it just because we don't have a front page and keep it nice and clean. Sticky at top of lists. Anytime you have a listing of content on the site, so I have 3 news articles and I have them all listed on one page. If one of them is marked sticky, then it's going to float to the top and it's going to stay stuck at the top of that list, rather than in whatever the sort order for that list is. Sort order could be chronological or alphabetical, and that sticky will still be at the top no matter what. Setting this as a default option in the content type doesn't typically make a lot of sense. Normally, if you're using something, if you're making something sticky, it's because you have a particular piece of content that you want to have stuck. Again, remember, these are defaults. So if I made this the default for every news article, they would all be sticky. So they'd all be stuck at the top, which means none of them would be stuck at the top because they would all be listed at the top. So in the same order. So it doesn't make sense to set this as a default at all. And then the last one we have in this list is create new revision. And this is a really handy little setting, depending on, again, your content type and what you want to do in terms of managing it. But Drupal has a built-in system to basically make copies of every time you edit a piece of content. And then you can actually go back and review what an earlier version of the piece of content looked like, and you can even revert back. So this is like handy if, if I would create a page and then I have like 2 or 3 people who are editing it, and Joe goes in and Bob goes in and they all edit, and then at the end something got really messed up and the page is just a mess, and it's a disaster. It's not the beautiful masterpiece that I created. I can go back and I can see who edited it, what kind of changes that they made, and then if I want to, I can just revert back to the earlier version. So it's very, very handy, especially when you have multiple people who are sort of have their hands in the pie, as it were. For news articles, I'm not too concerned about that, so I'm going to go ahead and just leave those off. But it's an interesting option to keep in mind. This last section here, these default flags, this again is not a core Drupal option. This has been added by a module that we enabled. We enabled the flag module, and it's added this little section here so that by content type we can determine, do we want to have it flagged automatically when we create it. We're not going to be using bookmark flags for this content type. So I'm not going to do that setting. But again, just like the 5-star ratings, it's when you add contributed modules, they can add different settings to the content type. And so it's just another area to make sure you're aware of when you're working with contrib. Okay, so I have all of my settings all good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. So now when I come down here and I look at my content types, I have stories gone. There's no story here anymore. But now I have news article, and here's my description that I put in there. And let's go actually create a news article and see what it looks like. So here's my news article. And now notice, again, I don't have title and body. I have headline and text. So that was changing my settings, the form settings. And if we scroll down here, revision information, not checked, because I did not check that by default. Our comment settings, they are enabled, because that's how we set that up. And then down here at the bottom, publishing options, we have publish checked. The authoring information is just particular to every piece of content. Drupal wants to track who and when, and so that's global on every piece of content that's created in the system. And the URL path settings is added by the path module so that you can create aliases. And input format we're actually going to be covering in more detail later, and we'll dive much deeper into that one. One thing to keep in mind that might not be apparent, I'm logged in as the admin right now, and so I can see all of these field sets, and I can make changes. So like say the comment settings, I could disable it for this piece of content if I wanted to. This is because I have the permissions to do that. A regular user who is creating content on our site probably wouldn't give them permissions to be able to change this willy-nilly on their own. So the defaults that you set on the content type settings, become the default for each piece of content that's created, and only some people may or may not be able to even override that default. So if it's the default and they don't have permission to change it, that's what it's going to be every single time. So just another thing to sort of keep in mind when you're setting those defaults is that some people won't ever be able to change that, so you need to make sure you pick the most intelligent defaults for the widest use case on your site. Alright, so let's actually just create a piece of content here really quick. Okay, so I need a headline. Very exciting news. And let me just, I could say, woo, excitement. Alright, so I'm just obviously just sort of adding some text in here, right? And I'm going to leave all the rest of these. Everything else is set to defaults, right? And then just go ahead and save it. So I have my article created. Another thing is to look at up in the URL, since we have path auto enabled and we have that alias thing going, we actually have a nice pretty little URL up here rather than just some random node numbers. So that is my news article. We have the news article content type created now. Now we also have something else we need to deal with. So I'm going to go back to my content types so we can see what we have and figure out what else we need to build. Administer content management, content types. So there's my news article, the newsletter and web form and page. Another piece of content that we need to have on the site are press releases. And press releases are different from news articles. We have some different requirements for what a press release should be compared to a news article. So we're going to go ahead and create that one from scratch. So up at the top, I go to the Add Content Type tab. And you'll notice this looks a lot like the form we edited when we changed story to article. But now we just need to fill all this stuff in because it's blank. So this is going to be our press release. The name, again, is the human readable name. This is what your end users see when they want to create a piece of content. Whoops, press release. Type is the machine readable name. Again, I want this to be very close to what the name is, so it all makes sense to me. As I'm building out my site, I'm going to go very simple here and call it press release. You'll notice that I used an underscore rather than a dash or a space in the machine readable name. And this is really important because this is a computer name, and if you read the little help text that's underneath here, it tells you that it must contain only lowercase letters, numbers, and underscores. That's all you can use for the type name. Otherwise, you'll get an error and it'll tell you to try again. So that's why I put that underscore in there. Our description. Okay, so that's our little textual things we need. So we'll look at submission form settings. Again, this is where the label for the title and the body come from. I don't really need to change these. All of these settings are fine, so I'm just going to leave that alone. The comment settings is important for me to look at because I don't want people to leave comments on our press releases. It's just sort of weird and not right. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn that to disabled. No one's allowed to leave comments on press releases. So we'll change that. We're not going to do ratings. We're not going to do 5-star on our press releases. So the last section I have to work with here is the workflow settings. And for workflow, what we're going to do is I'm going to actually turn all of this published and promoted off, because when the press release first happens, it's going to be unpublished just to make sure that we all agree that this is the press release that should go out, and then we can specifically publish it. So by default, it's actually not going to appear to the public. The other thing I want to do is I want to turn on creating a new revision. So there might be several people who are involved in creating my press release, and so I just want to track who's making what changes when. So, and I'm just going to do that automatically and make it a default. So let's go ahead and save that content type. And so now we have press release in our list. Now we have a few additional requirements for this content type as well. In addition to just the title and the body, they also want to have 2 additional fields on this form so that we can guide our users exactly what they should be putting on here. So I'm actually going to add 2 fields from the content construction kit onto this content type. So to do that, I'm going to go to Manage Fields. So when you get here, you'll see we have our title, menu, and body, and so what I need to do is add the 2 fields that need to be put onto this form. So first one that we have is a date line. So again, we have a label and then we have a machine readable name, which I'm making the same for simplicity's sake. And this is just going to be a simple text field, and it's going to be an actual text field. So I'll save this. We have some basic settings here. I'm just going to add a little bit of additional text here so that people know what dateline means. And the rest of these settings are fine with the defaults. I really don't need to do any changes in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that. Now I went through that a little quickly because I'm just going to go ahead and build this out, and if you want to get more information on how to work with the content construction kit and all the wonders that it can do, and it's really quite awesome, we have a whole other video that will cover CCK. So let me go ahead and add my last field here that I need. Just some contact information for, you know, who people should contact about the press release if they have questions. And so again, this is text. And this time I'll just make it a text area rather than a text field, give a little more room so we can have, you know, some breaks and names and numbers and things. Instead of 5 rows, I'll make this 3 rows. We don't need a huge text area. Again, the default settings, these are fine for me. I'm just adding a simple field in here just to help things out. Now the other thing I want to do is rearrange these real quickly because the date line should appear above the body, and the contact is fine down at the bottom. So I will just move that and save those changes. So now I have 2 fields have been added, and I have my my content type settings taken care of. So real quickly, let's go over to create content and just look at this press release that we've just created. So this is my new content type. So again, I have a title and the body, which are the ones that come with core, and then I've added dateline with CCK module, and we scroll down and here's the contact field that I added with CCK as well. And if we come down here and just look at these default settings that we set, it is automatically creating a new revision for us. So when we create this, it'll know that it needs to keep track of all the revisions. Every time someone edits, it'll keep track of that for us. The comments are disabled by default now, rather than enabled like they were on the news article. And then we have our other settings down here with publish options. It's not published right now. I could create this piece of content, and then later we could go in, open this, click published, and then it would actually become public. Alright, so let's just create a press release here real quickly so we can see what it looks like. Alright, so hot news. And the dateline. Alright, there's our dateline. I'm just going to put some lorem ipsum into the body. Contact. Alright. And again, we're leaving all of that stuff alone. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now, again, first, just notice that it is unpublished. That's why this light pink background color, if you can see that very well, is indicating that this is not published. So it's not publicly viewable right now. The other thing you're going to see here is that when we added these CCK fields, the label for the CCK field is appearing in here, and it's okay for contact because we want people to know that that's what that information is, but for dateline that just looks sort of lame because we just want the dateline, not that. So I'm going to go back to the content type and clean that up a little bit here real quick. So I'm going back to administer, content management, content types, and this is our press release content type. So I'm going to go back to managing the fields. Now, managing fields is where I added them, and I can rearrange the order of them as they appear on the form. Under the Display Fields tab, I have a few other settings I can play with. And here, you can see I can determine what I want to do with the label. Whether I want it above to appear inline, or what I want is hidden. I don't want the dateline to show at all, that label to show at all. So let me save that. So let's just go back and look at that content real quick and see what changed there. I'm just going to go back in my browser here to hot news. And now you can see when we come to look at hot news, there's no label appearing above this now, and that looks more the way that we actually wanted it to look. So there is my new press release, and we have a form that is very usable for our end users to make sure they put the right information in the right places. So creating content types is one of the first things you're probably going to do when you build a site. It's important to think about the kinds of content you're going to need, as well as the differences between them, and how you can make it easier for your users to create the content that you're expecting on your site. We also are going to need to be looking at how to find that content and list it, and we'll be looking at that in the next chapter.
So now that we've created some content types on our site, let's show how we can create some listing pages so that people can find these items. In the last chapter, Addie created a news article, and we really have no way to find it on the current site. All we have is this welcome page. We can click home and we go back to the home page again. If you go under Administer Content, we can see our listing of all of the content that's been created on the site. We have a little filter system here so that we can filter out to show just content of a specific type, or content that's published or not published, promoted, sticky, not promoted, etc., etc. We can show of a specific content type or in a specific category on the website. You can see we really don't have very much content on the website at all. We have these, the news article and the press release that Addie created. And you can see here that the press release is actually not published, so it's not going to show up on the website at all, even in the listing pages. Let's set that to published so that it will show up when I do create my listing page. We go under here, we can click the published link and hit save. And now we go back to this, the content listing page, and you can see that it's now published. And it even says that it's been updated. This updated indicator here will show until I actually go and view the page myself. And now when I go back I need to hit reload once I go back, but that updated indicator goes away. So let's create some sort of some dummy content for the site to kind of fill out a whole bunch of news articles and press releases, so that when I create my listings, I can actually see them in action with more than just one item each. We're using the Devel modules, Devel generate module. So the Devel package comes with a package of modules, including the Devel generate module. When you turn on that module, you get this section here in your administration page called generate items. We can generate users, we can generate taxonomy categories, we can generate content with this as well. And it's possible for other modules to add on other generation stuff into here as well. And the voting API module allows us to generate sort of dummy votes on content as well. I'm going to start by just generating some users so that we have some users to assign our content to. So when the content gets generated, it will attribute itself to a random user on the site, and we need some users on the site in order for that to happen. This step is something that you might or might not need to do, this process of like generating some dummy content. It really depends on how your production process for building your website is working. But because we're just doing this for example here, I'm going to show this here. So I'm just going to create 20 new users, and I'm not going to delete the existing users, and I'm going to spread the user accounts over the past 4 weeks. And now I've created 20 new users for the site. I'm going to trust that that happens and go back to the administer generate items. And now I'm going to generate some content for the site. Now I want to generate content for the news article content type and the press release content type. So I'm going to disable the other content types on the site. I also have options to delete all of the content of these types before generating new content. I don't want to do that. I'm going to create 50 nodes that will randomly be of these types. It'll create about 25 of each, so that'll work just fine. Spread it out over the past 4 weeks. It'll pick a random date for each one. And I want to create, let's say, 5 comments on each node. Now, we don't have comments enabled for press releases, so we won't actually get any comments on those, but we'll probably get, well, we will get 5 comments on each news article. And here I can also choose the word length of the title, the maximum word length. This is really going to depend on your site and kind of how it's being used and stuff like that. This is particularly helpful for if you're filling out a site for theming, and we cover this in the theming videos. But I'm just going to leave it at the default of 8 because we're not really focusing on that here. I could also add taxonomy terms and URL aliases here. Path Auto is enabled, and it will do its own URL aliasing here. So I'm going to leave that alone. If I had upload module turned on, I could also add uploads to each node. So I'm going to click do it and wait. And we get 50 nodes created, it says here, and I go back to the home page looking for my 50 nodes, and now I have 50 orphaned nodes on the website. There's no links to them, and so I can go back, we now know, go back to the admin content management content page, and we can see all of our new content. We've got news articles and press releases, and news articles and press releases, and news articles and press releases. And they're all attributed to these new made-up users, randomly chosen. So actually one of them here is attributed to the admin user, which is me. And we have these new marks next to them because they're nice new nodes. Now, what you'll notice about all of the press releases is they are not published. When I create my views, I'm going to create them so that they do not show non-published content, because we don't want to show even listings of content that hasn't been published yet. So really what I want to do now is I want to publish all of these press releases. And I can do that actually using these bulk tools right up the top here. Either I could go through and try and click and find the press releases and click that one and this one. Or what I could do is say I want press release type filtered. So we're going to filter and show just press release nodes. And so now here all of them are of type press release. I can click this here. And then I have these update options. So I can publish, unpublish, promote to front page, all of that with all of these in one fell swoop. And publish, the default option, is actually what I want to do. So I click update, and now we can see that what we have a listing of here is just our press releases still. We're still filtered. That is a option that kind of stays. And all of them are published. And if I go to one of these press releases, we can see here it is, and there's no comments on it. It's also created some content for the dateline field and for the contact field, so that's kind of nice there. Now, if I hit reset in this form up here, what I can get back to is a listing of all of the content of all content types. And we can take a look at one of the news articles. Just pick any of them here. And you can see here's a news article. And when the content gets generated, it tells you what content type it is. So in listings, you can make sure that you've got the right content types listed. And we have comments here on it. So now we've created all this new content on the site, but it's not showing up anywhere. We want to create a couple of listing pages to show this stuff. We can do this using the views module. We have an entire video on views, and I really won't get into the details here too much because it's, needless to say, can be very, very complicated. But we'll just sort of cut away for a moment while I create these views, and then come back and I'll show you what I did. Welcome back. I've created now two different views. I've created one for our articles, our news articles, and that's at the news path, and one for press releases at the press path. So if I go to /news, I get news, and go to /press, I get press. Let's take a look at the articles listing here and see what we've got. This will list all of the article content type, news articles, on the website. What we can see here is that it's showing nodes of the type news article that are published. So it's showing just published items. It's showing 10 per page with a pager. We have to show the page display to kind of see a little bit more of the specifics of how it's being output on the page. It's got a title of news that shows at the top of the page. It's showing nodes, and it's at the news path, and it's got a menu item called news. And this menu item, if we click on it here, is showing up in the primary links. So it's showing up right here at the top of the page. Let's click on it and see what we get. And here we have a listing of all of the news articles that we've created. We get 10 on the first page, and we can go to the next one and see 10 more, and so on and so forth. With the views, if I'm an administrator with permission to edit the view, when I roll over the view, you get these really light kind of edit, export, and clone links here. So if you ever see those on your website and don't know where they're coming from views. Sort of one of those little Drupalisms that I'm not quite sure where it came from. I'm going to go back to views here, list the views, And we can see that press releases look very, very similar. Basically, the only difference with them is that they're showing the node type press release. But other than that, they're pretty much the same. We've got a different title and different path. But this one also has a menu item that's showing up right here at the top of the page. And when I click on that, we get the listing of press releases. And these are showing up in reverse chronological order, which is how this view is set up. So because we generated those content items randomly over the past month, the latest one is the one that Addie created. So Drupal core gives only a few different ways of listing content on the site. You can use taxonomy, and you can promote it to the front page and that type of thing. But by using views, we get a whole lot more options. And it's much more flexible and extensible. In the future, we could change those views however we'd like. And now we no longer have that orphaned news and press release content on the site. We've got some primary navigation links to get to those. And we're starting to build a site.
In this section of the video, we'll be talking about roles and permissions. This is one of Drupal's really biggest strengths because it allows you to take the functionality of your site and allocate permissions of who can do what based on how much you trust them or based on their job function within your organization. Everything dealing with users, roles, and permissions is all visible under the Administration, User Management section, and here we see the variety of options available to you. We're going to go ahead and click on Roles, which is where our journey begins. By default, Drupal comes with two different roles: anonymous user, which is anyone who is not logged into the site, and authenticated user, which is anyone who is logged into the site. It pays to ask yourself, when building your Drupal site, what types of users am I going to have on the system, and what sort of things do I want them to be able to do? Logged in versus not logged in is not a very fine-grained, way to tell trusted users from non-trusted users. In our case, with our site, we're building sort of an intranet/customer portal. So it might be really valuable to us to separate our employees as a separate role. And it might also be useful for us to make an admin role, which will be people like us, people who are going in and administering modules, which is something we don't necessarily want our employees doing, but something which we need to be able to do in order to access the site. Right now we're logged in as user 1, which was the first user that we created when we created our Drupal site. But oftentimes it's useful to create an admin role and several admin accounts so that not everybody who can configure modules has to share the same password. Roles by themselves really don't do anything, though. To really get the power of roles, you have to go to the permissions page. And here you'll see a great big matrix of permissions and checkboxes and all kinds of stuff. This is probably one of Drupal's scarier pages, but once you get the hang of it, it's not really too bad. On this screen, you'll see that each module that defines permissions is a table heading. And I can see that I have the roles that I've created up here at the top. So we'll go ahead and configure a sample one just to give you an idea of how it works, and then we'll come back and show you why we set all the permissions on the site and how we set them. We'll use comment module as an example just to kind of show you how to configure permissions for one module. So on our particular site, anonymous users, we don't really want them to have permissions to do much other than just read the site content. While some sites on the internet may allow people to post comments as anonymous, there are certain considerations you need to bear in mind. For example, spam is a lot more prevalent with anonymous users than authenticated users, although spammers have tools to accommodate both. You can use tools such as the Mollum module or CAPTCHA module to help alleviate some of these problems. But in our case, we want to sort of lock the site down a bit more and give people an incentive to register. Authenticated users, on the other hand, we do want them to be able to post comments, but our client has given us a requirement that they not show up on the site immediately. They have a community manager employee who wants to go through the comments before they're posted and just check them over to make sure they're okay. So by unchecking the post comments without approval box, what that means is that authenticated users will be able to post comments, but they won't show up on the site immediately. Admin, well, they just want everything. They want to be able to access, administer, post, and post comments without approval. As you can see, it can get really tedious to check this for every single permission on the screen, so we're not going to do that. We'll use another module called admin role in a moment to alleviate that problem. And as for employees, we're going to go ahead and want them to both post comments and post comments without approval. But they don't really need to administer comments. We're going to let only the admin users do that. In your particular site, it might go either way. One thing to note is that any permissions that authenticated user has automatically replicate to the other roles. So I could actually uncheck something like access comments and something like post comments, because all of these users, or all of these roles, admin, employee, site maintainer, whatever else you might have, they have to be logged in order to do anything, and therefore these permissions are not actually necessary to check off. So let's go and take a look at what our comment changes have resulted in. If I go over to the user management users screen, you can see that I've pre-populated a few users. I've got employee 1 and employee 2. I've got a customer, and I also have a webmaster who's going to be one of our administrators on the site. Using the update options drop down here, what I can do is I can check off the 2 employees and add them to the employee role. And I can do the same thing for admin and webmaster. Now you might be wondering, since in the previous segment I just said that, admin is already a super user and can do everything because they're user 1, why would I add them to a special role that basically is redundant? The reason for that is because there's certain features of Drupal, particularly with views and block visibility by role, where if you don't have user 1 added to a role, it can sometimes get a little funny and things won't show up even though you think they should. So it just pays to add them to any roles that encompass sort of the administrative functionality. I'm also not adding a role to customer because they're authenticated user. By virtue of them logging in as a customer, they have the authenticated user role, so there's nothing special I need to do here at all. So in order to test these new roles and permissions and ensure they're working properly, I could log out and log back in, and log out and log back in again, but that's a little tedious and time consuming. So what I think I'm going to do instead is use a feature offered by the Devel module called the switch user block. So I'll go to administer, site building, blocks, and we didn't really talk about blocks too much yet, so I'm going to gloss over this a little bit. But basically, blocks are these little, auxiliary content that appear in the left and right sidebar, or up in the header, or something like this. And the Devel module offers a block of its own called switch user. So I'm going to take that and pop it just into the right sidebar, which moved it up here. And now if I save this form, I should see a new nice block over here. Now that I got this block enabled, I just wanted to point out a couple things. So if I see a user that's in italics like this, that means that if I switch to them, I can switch back. If I see someone who's not in italics, that means that once I switch to them, I won't be able to switch back. This, like a lot of behavior in Drupal, is triggered by permissions. So in order to really use this block, what I need to do is give additional users the ability to switch back and forth. Otherwise, I'll still be in the same position I was in before, where once I get to employee 1, I have to log back in. So I'll go back to administer user management permissions. So once I get to the permission screen, I know that this block is defined by Devel module, and so I'll go down to the Devel module part, and I can see that one of the permissions it defines here is switch users. And I'm going to go ahead and enable that for everybody because it'll allow me to switch to any user on the site even while logged out. Do not do this on a publicly accessible website. Only do it if you're just in development and there's no way someone can get to it, because you could have really nasty effects otherwise. So when I do that, you'll see that all of these users are italicized, and that means I can switch back and forth with total impunity, and that will be great. So let's take a look at what our permissions did and just verify that everything's working properly. So we'll switch into the news section, since our news content type is the only one that has permissions enabled. And of course, I'm admin, so I can do everything, including edit this view and click in and delete a post and all this sort of thing. So I'm going to start by just logging out entirely and seeing what anonymous users see. So when an anonymous user goes to the news page, they don't have any permission to add a comment here at all. In fact, they get prompted to log in or register in order to post comments entirely. So that's good. Now let's try customer, since they're the next roll up. So as a customer, I see that I do get an add new comment link here, which is great. Go ahead and click on that and enter something in here. I should point out here that if you don't have Malum module configured properly, you might get some sort of a warning about the Malum module not being configured properly, so you'll need to go off and do that. Additionally, if your comment is really silly, you might get Malum asking you to fill out a CAPTCHA, which it will do if it thinks that your comment is spam. So now I get a prompt that says, my comment has been queued for moderation by the site administrators and will be published after approval. And I can see if I scroll down here that it does not show up in the list. Now, the last thing to check is the employee. And the employee should have the ability to post a comment directly. I should also point out that this extra step with having to preview and then having to save, that's configurable as well. Drupal does this by default because it's just a little bit of extra work that a spam robot would have to do. So I can see that employee 1's comment got listed to the site immediately, unlike the authenticated user, and I also didn't get prompted up here as a notice that my comment was in moderation. But one thing I do notice is that over here on the navigation bar, I don't see a link to administer where I did with the super user. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to Webmaster, who should see that link. But they don't. That's curious. Why would that be? Well, we can switch back to the admin user, who will have permissions to do everything, and find out what that's about. So if we go to Administer, User Management, and Permissions, we see the general problem here where they have administer comments permissions, but they don't really have administer anything else. Most of this is blank. So we could do a really tedious thing where we, check every single one of these boxes, but that takes forever. What we're going to do instead is we're going to enable a module called admin role. So I'll go to Administer, Site Building, Modules, and we'll check off the admin role. Let's save the page. Nope, we still see a bunch of unchecked checkboxes here. Well, that's not good. So let's go ahead and configure this module, which is underneath a User Management admin role, and tell it which of our administration roles need to be checked. So we'll tell it admin and click Save Configuration. And now let's go back to the permissions page. All right, that looks much better. As you can see, all of the module's permissions are checked for the admin role. And the nice thing about this admin role module is we'll continue to leave them checked. Each time that we enable a new module, it would check the permissions for those as well. So we'll test this by switching back to the Webmaster user. And we can see the Webmaster gets the full range of navigation items available to them, including the Administer section and the Permissions page. So that's an overview of how to set up Drupal roles and permissions to help segment your site off into various access control so that you can control who has access to do things on your site. The process of checking off the various permissions, validating them to make sure that they're set properly with the switch user block or however you choose to do it, can be a little bit tedious. So we're going to go ahead and pre-configure a bunch of these permissions and then step through them to show you how we've configured them and why. So now we have our fully baked permissions all checked off. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these here because that would be a little bit tedious, but just some general rules of thumb. When you see something that has administer in the title, that's generally for your admin role. Once in a while it'll be for an employee role. If you say it's administering comments, you may want to give that permission to an employee in the system to be able to do. But generally the administer stuff, especially if it's for some of the more site buildy modules, is for your admin rather than your editors and stuff. Use PHP for anything. Generally give that out only to people you absolutely trust. In fact, we might even want to disable it from the admin role and have it something that only the user one can do. PHP is a really handy tool for doing fine-grained control over things, but with PHP access, people basically have an open door to do whatever they want, including deleting all of the users out of your user table, and all kinds of other nasty little things. When you see a permission that says access something, depending on what it is, usually those are a little bit more straightforward. So accessing comments is something that you probably want everybody on the site to be able to do. Scrolling down the list, you'll see generally these are pretty much set up the same. We have administer filters, have permissions on who can rate content. Once we start getting down into node module, things start to get a little bit interesting. The first thing that you'll notice is that each of the content types that we created, article, page, press release, simple news, and so on, all have create, delete any, delete own, edit any, and also edit own permissions. Something they do not have is view any and own permissions. All access to content itself is controlled by one permission by default called access content. Later, we'll be talking about how to get more fine-grained control, because obviously on an intranet site, we do want to protect some of the content of the site from being visible by all authenticated and anonymous users. Be careful with the difference between delete any and delete own. Delete any means literally any content on the site that happens to be a page, someone would be able to delete. So as you can see, we haven't given employees quite that much access. We've only given them access to delete and edit their own content. Another permission to be a little bit careful of is administer nodes. Administer nodes gives you access to that nice content screen we saw before, where you can find all of the content even if it's not in a listing page anywhere. But giving a person that permission essentially makes them able to create, edit, delete all content on the site. So it's something you want to be a little bit cautious of before you just go handing it around. We'll just scroll through for a bit to show you how we've set things up. You might choose to set things up a little bit differently, but this is just what works in our situation. One final permission I wanted to draw attention to is the access administration pages. If a user does not have that permission, they won't be able to go to any of the administer so-and-so, like administer comments and administer nodes. They won't be able to see that jump-off page we keep going to with the list of all the links. So that's another one you may want to hand out to any editors or site administrators. In this section, we talked about Drupal's roles and permissions. This is a really important concept to help get the functionality of your site accessible to people who need it and not accessible to those who don't. We covered a lot of the pitfalls that can happen when you enable new modules and don't have permissions in there correctly, as well as how to test the permissions on your site to ensure they're working the way that you need.
So now that we have some content and ways of listing that content, we'd like to give our content creators and administrators a little more flexibility in terms of being able to group and organize the content. The best way to do that in Drupal is through the taxonomy system. So we're going to go ahead in this chapter and take a look at that. So to start off, we will go back to our administer section. And under content management, we're going to scroll down here and go to taxonomy. So taxonomy might be a big word. It might seem a little bit confusing to some people, and there's a lot of text on this screen that sort of tries to explain what it is and give some examples. But the basic gist of taxonomy is that it's a way to group your content using keywords. And Drupal, in addition to just being able to use keywords or terms, instead of just having one big global bucket for terms, Drupal actually gives you the ability to have multiple groupings of those called vocabularies. So you might have a particular bucket of keywords you want to use, and that would go into one vocabulary. If you look on this screen here, we already have one vocabulary listed named newsletter. This was added by the Simple News module, which has already been enabled on the site. It needs a vocabulary to keep track of its own content, so it added this vocabulary for us. But we can add additional vocabularies ourselves. And the first thing that we are going to be doing, we know that we're going to need some free tagging. So this is something like maybe on Flickr, when you add a photo, you get to add a variety of tags to just sort of help describe that photo. So we want to have something similar for some of the content on our site. So we're going to go ahead and actually add a free tagging vocabulary that we can use. So I'm going to go up here to the tab called Add Vocabulary, because first we're going to basically create a bucket for our vocabulary here. So here is the stuff we get to fill out. The vocabulary name. Well, this one's pretty simple. It's just tags, free tagging, keywords. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it tags since that's the most obvious one to me. Also keep in mind that this vocabulary name will be used on the form itself, so when someone goes to create content, they're going to see that name as the label for the form field that they're using. And additionally, the vocabulary name can be used by things like Path Auto to automatically fill in the URL alias for us. So you want it to be a meaningful name that your users are going to see and that they might see in other places on the site. You can also add a description if you feel like people need to have some additional help here. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as the default for tags. And then down here, we'll see that we have content types listed. So these are all the content types that we have on our site right now. When you create a vocabulary, you can associate that vocabulary with individual content types so that they only show on those content creation forms and not on ones that you don't necessarily need it on. So for this free tagging that I want, of the content types that we already have, the only one that I really feel like I need this on right now is the news article. I don't need to have free tagging for these other ones. But the news articles can be about a wide variety of topics and they want to be able to tag those, but we won't necessarily know what they are ahead of time. When we scroll down here to the settings, we have just a few settings that we can do, but they're very important to think through and make your decisions. The first one we have is called tags, which sounds very appealing since we're creating a vocabulary called tags. And basically what this does, this allows that free tagging aspect where someone can just start to type in words and they can type in multiple words and there's not a preset list that they have to select from. They can actually add terms and reuse existing terms. So that's what the tagging will do for us rather than creating just a set list that people have to pick from. So I'm going to go ahead and select that because that's exactly what we want. The other thing that selecting tags setting will do for you is it creates the form field when you go to create your content that's presented to your user is actually an autocomplete field, which means that as people start to type in letters, it will search through the existing list of terms, and if anything is matching or close, it'll pull that up for them to see so they can just select it. And that really helps with avoiding things like getting two terms that are really close but not quite the same, because people can see, oh, there's already a tag for that, I'll just use that, rather than typing it a little bit differently. So very handy feature that comes with that. The next setting we have is multiple select. So this is if we want people to be able to add more than one term at a time. And this is always true for tags. It's in this help text under the bottom here. It's always true for tags. So we don't need to check that because if you're doing free tagging, people can always add more than one term at a time. This becomes more important if you have a set list of terms you want people to select from and you want to limit them to either only select one or allow them to select more than one. So I'm going to leave that one blank because I don't need to deal with that since I'm using tags. This last checkbox here is required, and that's pretty straightforward. Is this going to be required or not when someone creates a new piece of content? With free tagging, there's really no reason for us to require that on this. There might have some terms they need to add, but then again they might not, and we don't want to force them to just make terms up. So we're going to leave that unchecked as well. Now this weight field works a lot like weights in the rest of Drupal do. There's a list from negative numbers to positive numbers. And what the weight field will do with vocabularies is if you have multiple vocabularies assigned to a piece of content, which you can do quite easily, this just simply says which order would they appear in. So if you had 3 different vocabularies associated with, say, news article, when someone goes to create that piece of content, what order do you want them to select the terms in? Vocabulary A, vocabulary C, vocabulary B, that kind of a thing. You can move those up and down. This is the only thing I'm adding right now for this one, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave that at 0. The order of it doesn't really matter. So let's go ahead and save that. And we've returned to our vocabulary listing, and now you can see we have this new vocabulary listed. And you can see that it's for the news article content type. Another thing to notice real quickly here is that we have these drag and drop handles on our vocabularies. So this is another way that you can change the weight of the vocabulary. It does the same thing as that weight field we just saw on the previous screen. So I could move these up and down if I wanted to. I don't really care about the order, so I'm just going to leave that be. But let's actually go create a piece of content and see what we've done now, because we've added free tagging to the news article, so what does that mean? So I'm going to create content and news article. And you can see now on our form, in addition to our headline and text fields, which we had already, we have this new field called tags, which we just created. So let me go ahead and create a piece of content here. So we'll just go ahead and add some tags in here. So I'm going to say this is news about Drupal 7 and some features about Drupal 7. One thing I want to point out is the first term that we have here is Drupal 7 with a space in between. So this is considered one term by Drupal, not two terms, even though there's a space separating them. The separator for free tagging in Drupal is the comma. So that's how Drupal knows that I've finished a term and I'm moving on to the next term. So instead of creating 3 terms, it's going to create 2 terms. One is Drupal 7 and the other is features. So just something to be aware of and keep in mind when it comes to tagging within Drupal. So I just need a little bit of text. We have our text there and the regular stuff that we have on our form. I'll click Save. And now on this new piece of content, we have all of the things that we've seen before. We have the title, the body, submitted by, but you'll notice down here in the right-hand corner, we have our tags now. And again, if I scroll over Drupal 7, you'll see that's one term. That's all one link. It hasn't been separated into 2. Depending on the theme, these taxonomy terms are going to show up in different places. So just be aware of that in the garland theme that we're looking at here, they're down in the bottom right-hand corner. In other themes, they could be in other areas of the content or not even show at all. So if they're not showing up, one of the first things to do is actually check your theme and make sure it's displaying them. So if I actually click on this Drupal 7 tag, Drupal core automatically creates listing pages for taxonomy terms, which is pretty cool. So you notice that we have this taxonomy term is the title of our page, and also up in the URL, since we have path auto enabled right now, it's creating a path alias for us that is using the term name. Now, as people create more content, if other people use that Drupal 7 tag, all of those posts would be listed on this page for us. Another thing that Drupal core is doing for us that's very handy, and a main reason that people do like to use taxonomy for grouping their content is, if you notice up in the address bar, we also have an RSS feed for this. So Drupal automatically creates an RSS feed for each taxonomy term you have, which is really cool. So as people are adding all of this content and they're tagging away and creating lots and lots of new tags, from this piece of content I can access these 2 tags for this one. But over time you're going to have a large list of all these tags. So how do you actually find that list? You know, there needs to be a master list somewhere. And that is actually found back on our taxonomy administration area. So I'm going to go back to Administer Content Management Taxonomy. And we're back to our vocabulary listing. And we have tags. And if you notice over here to the right, there's a link that says List Terms. So if I go in here, these are the terms that have been created. And as people keep adding tags, they'll all be listed here. And this is where you can actually sort of manage the tags in the terms of if there are misspellings and or you want to delete tags, you know, someone's using some stupid tag and you don't want that on your content. This is where you would modify those. And I'll go back to this screen here, our major vocabulary screen. And also next to listing the terms, you'll see that there's a link for adding terms. Now, we're not going to add terms manually to a free tagging vocabulary because our users are adding the terms as they create content. If we needed to add something manually, like we really want people to use a particular free tag, so we want to sort of put it in there so it's available if they want it, we could do that by clicking on Add Terms, but in free tagging that's generally not done and it's not necessary. So now we have one more vocabulary we need to create. For our site, we also have some specific topics that we want to be able to direct our customers to and let them read all of the content based on particular topics that are important to our company and that we want to highlight. So I'm going to go ahead and create a set list rather than this free tagging where the users are creating it, so that every time we create a news article, it always has at least one of these special topics associated with it. So to do that, I'm going to go back up to the tab for adding a vocabulary. And we'll just add another one. Come down here. So this vocabulary name is going to just be called category. So I'm just going to leave description and help text at their default blank there again. Come down to content type. Again, I can select my content type. We only want this on news articles. We don't need that for the other content types that we have. And then when I come down to settings, this time I'm not going to check tags because we don't want free tagging where people can just add things randomly. We're going to have a set list of terms, which we'll set up in 1 second. We also only want them to pick one. We don't want them to be able to pick multiple ones at the same time. And we do want to make it required. Every news article should have this on it. So I'm going to check the required box. And we'll go ahead and save that. So again, looking at my vocabulary list, you can see the new category has been added, and it's for news articles. Now, I want to actually set up my own list of terms for people to select from. We're not letting users create these. So now I do need to use the Add Terms link. So I'll go over to Add Terms for category, and just simply start entering some terms in here. So we have products, and I'll click Save. And when you save a new term through this screen, it's just going to prompt you for the next one, because often when you're adding terms, you're normally adding a whole sort of series of them. So it just sort of pops you through. So you don't actually see the list yet, but we'll just keep adding terms and then we'll look at the list at the end. And then we also have services. And then we're also going to add a particular product, which is DVD. So those are the only ones I'm going to add now. We can continue to add more later as we need to fill things out. But let me go back to the list. So this is the list for all the terms in category. And you can see we have DVD products and services. Now DVD is actually a particular product. It's not sort of a top-level item on its own. So this is really a child of products. So we can drag this down and then indent it so that the DVD is actually a child of products, so that when we get that select list, it's sort of organized in a way that makes sense. So I've reorganized these. It's highlighted yellow, has a little asterisk telling me that we've made changes, but haven't saved them yet. So whenever you see yellow on anything where you've been dragging and dropping, you need to make sure you save that or your changes are not going to take. So let me save my ordering here. Alright, cool. So now I have a set list of things for people to choose from. So let's go back to the Create Content form and see what it looks like now. Create Content, going to News Article. So again, I have my headline, my text from the core, and now I have this vocabulary section. Now that I have more than one, Drupal is grouping them together for me in this vocabularies field set. And you can see we have the category, which we just created, and then we have tags, which is what we created earlier. And under category, you can see I can actually just choose one item from this list. And the asterisk is telling me that this is required. So let's go ahead and just create another one real quickly here. And then that would be a DVD, would be the category for this. And I'm going to use that Drupal 7 tag again. And you can see, as I typed it in, it auto-completed, and it's saying, hey, there's already a tag called Drupal 7. So if I would have just typed in Drupal, and I was getting ready to type a 7 like that, I would see, oh, there's already a tag that's similar to what I need. I'll just use that instead. So the beauty of autocomplete. We have some text, and I'll go down and save it. So again, we have this content's been created, and we have our tags down here. This is my tag from free tagging, and then this is my term from that select list that I had. But if I click on the DVD tag, we come to the listing page for DVD, just like we did for the other term. But you'll notice up in the URL here that the URL is different. The first thing you notice is that we have category twice. The reason that is happening is because PathAuto by default is prefixing all of our aliases for all vocabularies with this word category. So this is PathAuto's term category, and the second category is actually our vocabulary name. In the previous example, this was tags. So PathAuto was creating category tags and then our term. So this looks a little bit confusing, and this is probably something we would want to clean up in our PathAuto settings so that we don't have this weird double thing going on in the URL. After we have the vocabulary name, though, you can see that we have products and then DVD, because we created that hierarchy where DVD was actually a child of products. And so PathAuto is smart enough to actually create a URL structure that represents that, which is really handy. So Drupal's taxonomy system is a great way to group and organize your content. Drupal core is providing listing pages. It also provides RSS feeds for you, which are really handy. In addition to that, you can also use the taxonomy system with views so that you can create really customized lists exactly the way that you need them to be.